Yeah, it's nice to create a lab because then you can call yourself the director, which is kind of funny. But we have several studies that we're doing in schools, primarily here in the local schools, but also in New York. And so we're going to give you a taste of different pieces of it. So then hopefully we'll have time for questions, or we can always follow up afterwards. The big theme that goes across this is researcher-practitioner partnership. So the idea of how do we do research in schools with teachers as collaborators. So all of this work that we're going to be presenting is not work that we're doing and coming in and doing to teachers. It's research questions that the teachers are interested in because they're relevant to them, and it's strategies that we're working with teachers to create, or teachers have created and we think they're brilliant, and so we promote their work as well. So that's the main theme of the work. And so I am very soon going to hand it over and really just kind of be the MC and introduce different parts. But we're going to start with Todd and Yasemin giving us an overview and a rationale for this work.
3 hands.
I know, right? If you want to, I can.
You want to forward for me? Oh, that'd be great. Oh, not that far forward. Okay, so we'll start off with a little bit. Why in the world would we be interested in teaching kindergarten through 8th grade kids about computer science? And it really comes down to the fact that CS Ed over the course of the last 3 to 4 years has had kind of a second resurgence. There was a much earlier boom in computer science education back in the 1980s and even a little bit before, even some other stuff that was even before that, but this is kind of the big resurgence of it. And it's come along with a lot of fanfare. There's politics involved, and of course, there's a ton of money involved right now, including, I don't know if anybody saw, just yesterday, Amazon, who's looking for their second headquarters, announced that one of the criteria that they are going to be using to select their headquarters site is what is the state of computer science education in that locale, which is a game changer in a lot of ways. Yeah, very, very interesting. So CS is beginning to be seen as a foundational knowledge for all students as one of the different. CS education has been adopted statewide. I think we're now at 14 or 15 different states, with each of those states either writing their own computer science standards or adopting the Computer Science Teachers Association standards as a whole. It's also, very importantly, been in the newly reauthorized Every Student Succeeds Act of last year as a foundational content area.
Oh, sorry.
I got it. So what is the CS for All movement in the United States? It started about a year ago at an event that happened at the White House with then President Obama. It's an educational movement to include CS education opportunities for all students. And part of that is that CS has kind of traditionally been associated with a very, very narrow range of students. The White House initiative kicked it off in 2016. There was a petition that was signed by 26 governors and dozens of industry CEOs. The commitments in those 2 different capacities have gone up significantly, both in terms of government and in the private sector, and also funding for National Science Foundation grants has increased as well. So K-12 opportunities that teach concepts and practices associated with computing from early ages. When we think about computer science education at the K-12 level, and again, we're mostly centered around K-8, we kind of have these 2 main arenas. We have the concepts or the understandings that kids should have about computer science, and then we have the practices, the things that kids should be doing when they're engaged in computer science activities. A big idea is that kids are learning to create and not just use, right? So we don't want a society of users, we want a society of creators. It's widely seen as a new literacy, although that's not a new idea at all. And the big thing, as we talked about a little bit earlier, is we have these issues of disproportionality. We have classical underrepresentation of females in computer science, of folks of different ethnic backgrounds, and of course of students with disabilities in computer science as well. Maya, do you want to, Kyung, you want to talk this one?
So So we're going to focus on students with disabilities. Reason is because of our registration changes, more students with disabilities are included in U.S. Public schools, and that was 30% of whole student populations. And the largest student with disabilities including in public school. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous. Those are the students with learning disabilities, and then other categories are speech and language and other health impairment and autism spectrum disorders. So based on the NCES, they're saying that at least 80% of students with disabilities are included in general education curriculums, but we're not thinking that we're ready for educate those students.
And that's important because as computer science becomes more and more part of that general education curriculum, we know that we've got kids with disabilities in those classrooms. We have to be thinking proactively about how we're going to best include them and give them their best chance for success in computer science. Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Okay. So like I said, we're not ready for yet. So we do not have a curriculum for them to access. And most of teachers has a low expectation in students with disabilities. They have thinking that students who struggle in content area, they're not gonna success. So they have really bad, low expectations. And then because we're not educating teachers with those, so they have lack of instructional strategies, knowledge, and skills.
So some of the instructional affordances that we associate with computer science education are opportunities for creative problem solving. CS education is often highly motivating to kids, and so therefore you get a lot of student buy-in when you undertake CS ed. You put both of those two things together, and we have these CS activities that are often full of ill-defined problems. They're often multi-step complex problems, and there's often a lot of open-ended exploration, which are all things that kids with disabilities can really struggle with. And what that leaves us with is we have students with disabilities are often being set up for failure as well as a little bit of success. But it's an area that we want to look at and help move the field forward in. And from here, Yasemin is going to talk about conducting research in schools.
It is well known that limited impact of research on the practice in the schools. The reasons are disconnection between K-12 community and university researchers, and other reason relevance of research findings to practical solutions for classroom. Also, teachers were skeptical for the educational research finding if they are appropriate for their classroom or not, and the limited and the lack of regular feedback between researchers and the teachers. Solution to this gap is the collaboration. Collaboration provides ongoing feedbacks between researchers and teachers, and it builds trust between the communities and make the research findings usable and accessible for the practice. And this results in knowledge construction of both sides. Thank you.
So a traditional research cycle might be one where you identify research gaps or an area of need in practice. You design and fund research studies in schools. You do a little bit of outreach and maybe partner with some schools, produce some PD, conduct your research with the schools, and then disseminate your findings, embrace the research community. And to an extent, our group does that. Oh, yeah, okay. To an extent, our group does that. However, I don't think we're that linear. I think that's one of the beautiful things about our group, is I think that our priorities are often intersecting and they are often flowing between the different priorities. One of the great things about our group is that, in my view, it was really kind of born out of outreach, right? It was born out of Dr. Reese and Misty going out to schools and saying, what do you need? What are the problems that your teachers are having? As a district, where do you see yourself going, and how can the university help you? And from there, from that outreach, began research and began this back and forth relationship between research and practice. And then it led us to some significant partnerships and service opportunities in the community locally, but also in the community nationally. And I think that that's another huge strength of our group, is we are so tuned in to the national computer science education community. And next, I think we have Jelena, who's going to talk a little bit more specifically about one of our studies.
Thank you. So just hold it like this. Right?
Yep.
Thank you. So in the spirit of this researcher-practitioner partnerships that the colleagues talked about, and also lack of instructional strategies, more specifically, we are going to present to you our study findings from the strategies for including elementary students with high incident disabilities in CS. It's a case study on 4 teachers in our local community, and it's exploring effective instructional strategies for teaching CS in K-8 classrooms. Specifically, the study was guided by 3 research questions on teacher-identified student challenges, and also strategies to overcome those challenges and any observed successes, academic, behavioral, social, for students. So our methodology, again, was a case study methodology, meaning that each teacher was her own unique case in the study. And then in the end, as a collection of cases, we present the combined findings. So we'll give you a taste of that today a little bit. We interviewed those teachers. We also observed in their classrooms, we observed students as they work together, and then, or individually, and then we analyzed lesson plans. So that was a way of triangulating our findings. We can move on to the next slide and present our findings across grades 1 to 4 with regard to challenges. So there was 4 specific groups of challenges, mainly generalizing from teachers to students' own work. And what that meant, students sometimes struggled when they were to create their own story problem versus when they were given one as a model in class partially, and then they would together complete it. So that was that example. And then multi-step problem solving. This was across grades, although a little bit more prominent in lower grades. Skipping steps, and then getting lost, or some students, such as in the 4th grade, they were unfamiliar with some the problems had multiple solutions. If we could go back one more time, no problem. Students also unfamiliarity with CSCT, using random blocks, or not recognizing some blocks that they needed for their story problem, and then frustration. This was across grades. Self-esteem, lack of persistence, or math phobia. So how do we address those from the teacher's perspective and using instructional strategies? Again, as our colleagues pointed out previously, there's a lack of instructional strategies. So it's really creative of these teachers to come up with these, and we identified in the study. Yes.
Instructions and collaboration and real-world application is the 4th thing they're saying that they're used more often to engage those students in the CSCT instructions.
Yes, so for project planning, just to quickly exemplify, teachers used worksheets. We will show you an image of those as well. And that was a way, too, to formatively assess for teachers. What that means is they would, in the unplugged section of a particular class, fill out the worksheet, the teacher will check it, and then they can then code in Scratch their story problem off of that worksheet using pseudocode. So those acted as advanced organizers in a way as well. And then peer collaboration was another strategy. Explicit instruction was yet another one, with modeling new vocabulary or previous vocabulary with reminders. Instruction, and then step-by-step directions, and then real-world applications. So using objects or people that students already were familiar with in presenting new material. So perhaps Kyung can also say a few words on these images. This is just...
So this is an example of checklist provided by Canute at Champaign Unit 4 district. So teachers provide this, so students kind of check it, whether when they're following it. Because one of the challenges teachers saying that students are not reading the directions. So that was the one, this checklist helping them to follow the direction without reading the full sentence. And that was the one that teachers provide to students so they can understand the conditional statement. If then else, what can they do? So if I do the homework, then some like dancing, like those practices. And the bottom one is one of the activity they're doing in class. So it's a card deck up game. So they're saying, if you have a heart, sing a happy birthday song. Then others, they have to do whatever they have their card in it.
What grade is it?
I think it's fourth.
Yes. Okay, and just to finish our segment here of the presentation with regard to successes, that was our last research question. We're good with time? Excellent. Okay, so those were the successes that were observed. Were demonstrating mathematical understanding through CS, so going in front of class and presenting, and then computer as an equalizer, and we'll explain what we mean by that. So it was a somewhat surprising finding from the teacher's perspective, because they would see students go in front of class and present their work. And then students, interestingly, who were somewhat weak in math, would be very good in coding. And they would be very good peers to lead others. And so in that sense, we use the word equalizer. We kind of leveled the skills, the math and coding skills. So it was an ideal environment for them to both shine. So we end there, and then actually that moves us to tactical briefs.
Our findings and our observation and interviews, we're thinking that teachers might need more resources to go in to find the strategies. So we developed this tactical pedagogy brief. So we have a current brief promoting student collaborations and role of paraeducators and the universal design for learning framework. If you want to look at the website, that's in our website in CTRL. And we're in the progress in project planning and teacher confidence and co-teaching now. So this is our website. Okay. Yeah, we're going to show it.
Okay, thank you. All right, and now we give it to Todd.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so another one of our big projects is thinking about how can we measure what kids are doing when they're engaged in these computing projects, right? And so about, what was it, 3 years ago, Maya? Is that when? 2012, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was that long ago. So the C-COI, or the Collaborative Computing Observation Instrument, is now going on its 5th year, and it's in its 3rd-ish iteration of redevelopment. And we're super actually excited about what we're doing with it, including some advanced visualizations to help folks to be able to understand the data as it's coming out.
Can I interrupt for just 1
Yeah.
second? The original programmer, Evan Ramos, who did the first iteration of the C-COI, it's now on its 3rd.
Go, Evan.
So,
What happened?
Yeah, Chris is in the lower right corner. If you can move it just a bit. Oh, perfect. Oops, didn't mean to do that.
So the way that the C is that when we go into classrooms, we're using the kids' computer screens. We're taking video screen capture of the kids' computer screens, which also uses the microphone. And so we can hear what those children are saying and what any of the students that are around them are also saying. And we take both of those data points and we use that recorded video capture to do an analysis of both things. The dependent variables are often the amount of time on task, the methods of help seeking, how is collaborative problem solving being played out, and can we tell what are the specific computing challenges that they're involved in. So the C-COI displays individual or collaborative behaviors. There are separate branches for those. An event is something that's defined as a sequence of behaviors beginning when a student starts to work on a computing subtask and ending when that subtask is solved. The data shows that each event can be one of 3 different paths. So you can either have a problem-solving path, you can have a socialization path, or you can have a path where they're just kind of generally expressing how curious or how excited or how great they feel about the task that they were involved in was. And so this is a depiction of kind of the flow of that. So an event begins, you start off with node 0, and it's asking, well, how did the event begin? And then we move on and we say, who initiated that event? How did the interaction begin? What was the problem? How did the event occur, et cetera, right? Okay, do you want to skip this one since it's kind of hard? Yeah, it's just kind of hard to see. This is one of the data representations that we have on the version that we're iterating on, although we're now looking at different types of visualizations because when lay folks look at this, they're kind of perplexed, which is understandable. So here is one of the ideas that we're working on as far as a different kind of visualization. You can see we've got the time up here. In colors, we have the different pieces along the timeline. So an event starts, a peer comes in, maybe an adult's coming in, someone's expressing curiosity, that event ends. Then the next event, and so on and so on and so on. Yeah, and Mohamed's going to talk about vocabulary and strategies to help. You got it?
We are also concerned about CS instruction, vocabulary instruction, because we want the students to get out of something, not only doing the things they are supposed to do, but also to get some new vocabulary or in which they come across while they are doing the activities. So we are. For example, if you were a teacher how would you teach a word like algorithm? So this is a challenging thing. So we are searching for strategies that might help us through the project to get the students know those new vocabulary. So we've made a search in literature to see what are the most successful strategies to teach new vocabulary in CF. There are mnemonics, and there is the acoustic link and the imagery link. The acoustic, like, it is related to the audio. I mean, for example, if there is a long term, for example, you use acronyms or anything related. For example, if you want to learn a new word, you get a familiar word that you know already. And also the imagery link, you see a picture of the new vocab. And there is also the cognitive strategy instruction, which is mainly based on the meaning, the semantic aspect of the word. For example, if you are teaching them new vocab, you will ask them to divide those vocabulary into, for example, if you are, geometry vocab and algebra vocab. So this is related to the meaning of or the semantic aspect of the word. The third thing is, or the third aspect is direct instruction. In direct instruction, you have the student and you teach him directly, and you take like feedback from the student and make sure that the student has already learned the new vocab. In this aspect, we are working with with the teachers in the project, okay? So, and we are still finding strategies. We've reached, or we have consensus on two main strategies, or two main models. The first one is Freyer model, and the second one is CAP's content acquisition podcast strategy. In Freyer model, this is like a workshop we did in order to apply Freyer model on the word algorithm. This model is based on 5 steps. The first one is that we give a friendly definition of the word and give examples and non-examples and also characteristics of the new word. And this is the result. I mean, this is the sheet which is going to be shown to the student. So, for example, if we define algorithm, it would be step-by-step process to complex task, and we give characteristics like sequential order matters, similar definition in math, different algorithm can achieve so and so, and we give examples, making breakfast, multiplying 2 digit by 2, and we give also non-examples. And not only this, we take feedback. We give the teacher gives some other examples to the student and makes sure that he has already learned the new vocab. There is another model which is called CAPS, content acquisition podcast strategies, which employs most of the previous strategies in service of the of teaching in CS vocabulary. It works also on friendly-based definition, evidence-based practice, using of explicit instruction, immediate feedback from the student about their understanding of new vocabulary, using mnemonics and cues, and also working on the morphological approach. We divide the vocabulary, if possible, and use multiple means, visual and auditory, because it is mainly a video. And we use multiple means like the audio, the auditory aspect, and the visual and repetition, and taking also feedback from the student about the new vocab, and using like model prayer, like the previous model. We use examples and non-examples, and if the non-examples are not necessary or confusing, we omit them, and we also use the semantic relation. For example, if you apply this on the same word algorithm, we will find the same thing: friendly definition, characteristics, examples, non-examples, and we add like a photo. If there is a video, it's okay, but you can show the video or part of it if there is time. Okay, so there is no time. Also, for example, here the word algorithm, we divide it into mnemonics and the morphological aspect. So we divide into algorithmic, the famous mathematician, and rithmus. So it is like a way we handle such vocabulary. Okay.
Okay, so now the fun part, I guess, is the questions. I will say about this, we've been doing this for, since 2012, and it's been exciting to see the research component really expand over the last few years, and Maya and team have built the collaborations with University of Chicago, with New York, and gotten grant funding. And because of the work that's already happened in Champaign schools, we've been able to build on that foundation with the elementary school, and now returning to the middle schools, which was kind of where this started back in the days when Abigail Sneer and Kathleen Harness were going into the middle schools in Champaign to do e-toys. So it is the expansion, I don't want to say culmination, I almost did it, but it's the expansion of the work that started there and has been continuing. But I'd like to open it up now. Any questions from the group?
I'll start with one.
Yes.
So just from the practitioner side, can you tell us a bit about the, one tension has always been time of like, you already have a full curriculum, so how are you getting all kids to engage in CS when it's not just an extra, an elective? So I'm curious to hear a little bit of the story of how that's unfolded in these schools, to know like how it started, where it's at now, what tensions still exist.
So I can answer that if you'd like. Oh, we don't need the mic anymore. That's awesome. So it's a combination of things. The first is when the teachers are actually involved in curriculum development and they know the curriculum, they can say, like, for example, if they're using Everyday Math 4, the material is really meant to be covered in 4 days, and then there's like a flex day. So if a teacher knows that, and there's a lot more in the curriculum than anybody could ever cover, they kind of could say what would be an activity that might either displace another activity or might be done in relation with, like, closely with another activity. It's always a tension. The other part is because we're working with the curriculum developers of the math curriculum, and we're same thing, right? There's a tension there too, right? Because everything is important to them, but they're also aware of the fact that if we're, right, it's a fine line, but we can have those conversations of if we're wanting to teach this math concept, And we're also wanting to integrate CS and C. Like our hypothesis is if we're doing this together, we're letting kids, for example, demonstrate their mathematical understanding in a more creative way than doing math boxes, then it's actually good for kids. And so we can kind of go back and forth with the curriculum developers as well, but it's a constant tension. Right now on the grant that we have with the University of Chicago, we're bringing teachers in at the development process. We're saying, okay, these are assumptions we're making about integration. Yasemin is doing a bunch of work looking at the literature of how this is happening. So we're trying to learn both from the teachers and from the curriculum and from the literature itself, and wrestle with that.
Yeah.
So, but bringing the teachers in and saying, is this realistic? How would this actually happen in a classroom with students? Rather than developing and assuming it's going to just work.
Yeah.
Sure.
For okay, one follow-up question, and then sorry. Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I definitely how is administration react?
Well, it requires administration to really have buy-in and to give teachers permission, right? So if the pacing guide is so strict, then the teacher's not going to take the chance of trying something new. Because anytime you try something new, it's going to take more time, even if it's really well integrated. So I think that's like the first point of entry is for the administration to be okay with failure, quote unquote, okay with experimentation, I guess is a better term for it.
I think it helps, as Todd pointed out, that this has become all the rage lately, so that administrators kind of want to get on the bandwagon. But we were ahead of the curve. Back in the day, which was only 5 years. Well, actually, and Abigail and Kathleen was doing it 12 years ago. Probably, yeah.
So as Abigail said with the administrators, so they also care about CS, but they also care about their PARCC scores on math and things
Really
like that.
important.
Have you looked at all about trying to see classrooms, in the district, math scores on those types of assessments that are engaged in the CS with math and those just the math?
So the new grant that we have we're looking at integration of computational thinking, specifically and focused on fractions in a 3rd through 5th grade trajectory. Remember, this is, as a research, it's very new. So we've been doing these micro studies. In year 3, which is, we're starting this one in January, we're going to have a treatment control group looking at math scores related to fractions. So we have no idea, right? We don't even know if what we're doing is harming their understanding of fractions, right? We don't know. I mean, making the assumption that this is a good thing. I mean, our hypothesis is, our initial research is showing that it is, but we don't, being transparent with the schools, and I mean, they're interested in the bottom line. And those scores, we always say that's not what we're interested in. But for the schools, we want to have something very sensitive to their students' understanding. So we're bringing in people with the expertise in activity-based assessment. We're much more interested in that. Like, are the kids actually understanding fractions better, right? Because the PARCC is not going to be sensitive to moving the needle right now, because we're looking at a sliver of content. But our hypothesis is if we do this right, we're going to increase engagement. We're seeing that in our own work, right? So persistence is increasing, kids are taking more chances, kids are working together more, kids are using creativity, being able to demonstrate your mathematical understanding in creative ways. We see as all good things, but we don't have the rigorous treatment control study where we're accounting for pretest score. That's going to happen in like 3 years, but not on PARCC. We're going to look very specifically at fractions, and we're going to start looking, okay, if we do this related to this one area of mathematics, is it making a difference? So we're like light years away from looking at standardized assessments.
I really like the notion of an applied research in working in partnership with classroom teachers, because of the potential for transformation that's going to create, not only what you're learning about how these practices, but you're really helping that teacher advance their practices as well. I get really confused about what needs to happen to help school districts advance computer science or any of the STEAM movements. And recently I heard someone talk about leadership summits as a strategy for bringing in teams from school districts so that they build this action agenda of how they might is that being talked about on campus at any level that Illinois might begin to do some leadership academies for school districts? And
It would be really, I know that there are other states that are much further ahead than Illinois is. This is really a district by district initiative here in this particular state. I was pointing at Todd because there was this huge summit in St. Louis earlier this week, and there were a lot of districts and state representation.
There's almost 300 different districts represented from around the Midwest. And they went through a day-long process of strategic planning, specifically based on a process that the Computer Science for All Consortium had put together. But how do you take a district where they're at, whether that be at the very beginning or a couple years into it, and how do you help them to strategically plan to grow that initiative?
And Champaign School, Unit 4 School was part of that. So if that's something of interest, we can connect you with the folks who went to that workshop.
And those planning materials are all on their website, which are for free.
Yeah.
Do you want to say some of the states that you see as kind of leading the way on this? Are there places to go? I think like Arkansas is.
Yeah, so
really amazing.
Arkansas is kind of the national leader in terms of this, which is kind of crazy to think about. But Governor Hutchinson there ran on, one of his platform pieces was on computer science education for all kids. And they have put a ton of money invested into computer science education, and consequently they have a tremendous reach. Arkansas is a leader, Washington State is a leader,
New York is a leader.
New York is a leader, Massachusetts, Maryland, Rhode Island is coming upon. Indiana,
Yeah.
right next to us, is not a leader, but they have adopted computer science education standards and are actively pursuing it. They have computer science education as part of their teacher preparation program at the University of Indiana. So it's all over, and it's growing every single day. And I think to answer the question about how do you get that leadership buy-in, I think the first piece is a lot of folks in Illinois don't understand the scope of where we're at right now. They don't understand where people around them are at and what they're doing and the value that they see in it. And I think that once folks start to see some of that, it really starts to change some minds.
I do think that we've seen with the elementary school, when Todd was advocating with his colleagues at Kenwood to get us involved with what they were doing there, part of the idea was to make it a more chosen school in the schools of choice framework of Champaign. And I think it's fair to say that that's been very successful, that Kenwood is now one of the most chosen schools, whereas it wasn't a few years ago. So that, I think, speaks to the growing awareness in the communities, at least, of the importance of the computational thinking in schools.
What was your question?
In the first, at the beginning, let's say as and the computational thinking, and just now the how can we measure students of computing process? I want to know, is there any method we can measure students' computational thinking? For example, when students take part in the computer science education, we can say that this class student, another class student, this class student have improved in computational thinking. Another student perhaps not a big improve in computation. How can we measure computational thinking? In past years, we have a project about in my countries in higher education, the undergraduate students learning programming class, how we can measure the computational thinking. Finally, we find it's very difficult for us to measure the computational thinking. Many staff have many views about what is computational thinking. Yes, I wonder.
That is the $1 million question. What is computational thinking? Right. I'll say that there are research groups. NSF, National Science Foundation, is now investing in researchers who are specifically looking at measuring computational thinking. So Shuchi Grover's work at SRI, she's got an NSF project looking at measuring computational thinking. It's very hard, right? And so sometimes what people do is that they'll look at some code and they'll have kids interpret it, but we're like, that's really more understanding like what the code is. It's not really the thinking process, right? Because if we think about computational concepts, right, things like looping and conditional logic, those are concepts, right? But the computational thinking is much broader. Like, can you think? How do you think about abstraction, or how do you? Right, that is a lot harder. So one of the reasons that we're focused on measuring kind of process, like what are kids doing, how are they problem solving, is because for us that's something that's more attainable right now. But I'll say that if that's an area, we can connect you with the folks who are real experts in the measurement and computational thinking.
Because finally, we hope we can build the systems just like AI, artificial intelligence. When students do something, if his load is not improve the computational thinking, we can give students recommendation, just like about the recommended systems, give students some suggestions, help or support students high order thinking, just give some tips, improve.
Kind of like in the intelligent tutoring type of things. Yeah, I think that those are things that, how do you create a system that's responsive to where the child actually is? I know they've done that a lot in math, but this is not, I haven't seen much of that in computer science.
Do we have to know what it is before we measure it?
Don't you think?
Well, I mean, agree on what it is.
Yeah.
Do we, agree on what it is. That's and I don't know. You know, I mean,
yeah, it's not a good answer. It's that it's one of the areas in the field that we're. I'm really happy that there are people who are really interested in it. So Jim Pellegrino is one of our co-PIs at the University of Illinois Chicago, who's really interested in assessment. And so I'm hoping that a year from now I'll have a better answer, or we'll have a better answer for you, because even though our grant isn't focused on assessment, we have to bring in the assessment into the learning, because I mean, how do you help a child improve if you don't have the evidence and see what they're doing? So.
I've been interested in the description you're giving of how you sort of started, and then you're starting to sort of document and make public. Because one of the things I've been thinking back in my mind is, like, I know this grew out of a very organic set of relationships that George and some other people have been pursuing for quite a long time. You know, in the description that Todd was giving of how it's not just a sort of a linear life cycle, but, you know, sort of outreach that gives birth to research that then, you know, the sort of back and forth process. Then, but how do you, sort of like, how does the fire, you light the next fire in a place where you don't have the benefit of that really long thing when you start to document it and show it from different vantage points, not only lesson plans, but sort of administrative strategies and, all sorts of, different ways, like student outcomes and so forth, and legitimization and sort of recognition and buy-in from different kinds of entities. To the extent that Illinois isn't doing that well as a system, but it still kind of creates those markers that could make new partners or new sites or whatever sort of sit up and take notices. Yeah, this really is a thing, and we're not out of the loop because we haven't had a 10 or 20 year partnership doing something. I mean, that seems important because it's, there are people who want to do things, but you guys are limited resources. And so
one of the reasons that we started to create some of these materials that Kyung was talking about is because of that. Like, how do we, right, George can't go into a district for, 10 years, and or Abigail for that matter. And so having a place to start with saying, here's some things that we've learned, and here's some materials that might be useful, but are still drafty, and we'd love to get some feedback. And so I think this idea of presenting ourselves as a resource and also as not people that are fully experts. But I don't know, in terms of documenting, I mean, other than providing resources and being available right now, I mean, frankly, from a research perspective, we don't need more research sites because we're at capacity. But there's a huge need in terms of schools, and especially the work we're doing around kids with disabilities and kids at risk for academic failure, because a lot of districts, not the ones here, are saying computer science for all means every kid is getting, I mean, here they're doing it too, but not across the district. And kids with disabilities are in those classrooms. And teachers are saying, well, they want to help, they want to support their kids, but they're not, they don't have the skills. And so providing those supports and the resources is one way, but.
Can I answer that?
Sure.
I think the way I interpreted your question was one about resources, but also about if you don't already have pre-existing relationships,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, if I look back to where a lot of this research started, which was at Kenwood, right? When I was a teacher there, the school was already looking for something, like we wanted to make a change. And one of the things that was offered up was this partnership with Dr. Reese at MSTE. And I worked with George years before on the M2T2 project. And I knew that George was not going to come in and do research to us, right? I knew that George very much valued teachers and respected teachers. And so that made it, I could easily go to my principal and go, you know what, this is where we want to go. Because this is someone that's going to come in, and it's not just going to be expectations on us, it's going to be the exact opposite. It's going to be what can we do for you, and then let's create this cycle. So I think that if you can plant a seed, right? Because I mean, we did M2T2, it was like 10 years. Yeah, and so
2000,
yeah, so I mean,
17 years.
Almost 13 years before that, and that seed that had been planted back then, that relationship, right? Paid a dividend off, almost a decade and a half later. So I think planting a seed here and there and building relationships in that way, you can't discount that. It's not an answer, but you can't discount it.
Yeah. And if I understand your question, I think that we have to have an advocacy for investment in districts and schools, as some states really are, that are going to push things locally to make initiatives happen. When we've been able to leverage things, and including the research interest and research grants, but also, there's got to be support from the districts, which then means from communities and from the state to say this is a priority, this is how it fits or must fit. It's not tested by PARC. So we may have to kind of advocate to move aside some of the things that dominate the consciousness of administrators. So I think that it's more than the research question itself. It's the advocacy for this is an important thing.
And it sounds like it's advocacy coming from multiple sides.
One of the important advocates I think early on was I remember Lenny Pitt from computer science presenting to us, we've got this, here's a university, Google comes here, to grab undergrads all the time. And this was happening way before 2012 when we started with Kenwood. So here was the university with these premier programs, and K-12 computer science was the word was non-existent, actually, that they put in reports. So now there's all of this energy. What does it take for Illinois to lead the way? That would be a political, I think, commitment as well as not just a research effort.
I mean, Chicago's doing a lot. And,
yes.
But in terms of the state as a whole, I think a few years ago, I think there was an opportunity for Illinois to be like, let's be. But at this point, it would be really great to just be able to be on par with some of the midline implementers in terms of computer science. But, I think the national visibility is a good thing.
Evan?
Do you think the work you're doing will be a good foundation for a potential CS plus education major?
There have been some talks about it. I know that that's this, the CS plus, right? There's just now one with music. Gabrielle Allen, who's our Associate Dean for Research, and others have had conversations around that. I wouldn't be surprised. I would be really excited if that's something that happened. So I hear it and it's floating around. So we'll see if it actually happens.
It's probably a little bit too, you see those types of things more in states where the states have said, we need this because we now have standards and we're going to require this in schools, so then the universities have a mission to fulfill, that kind of thing. But even more national things like the new APCSP course, right, that just came out for
computer science principles
course came out, right? That makes CS Ed more accessible to a lot of early high school students. So it's going to create some demand on its own.
Yeah, except for in Champaign, at Centennial, there weren't enough kids to take the computer science principles class, so we didn't make. So it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. You have to have, enough.
And there used to be. That's going back.
Yeah.
That's a puzzle to me. Actually, I mean, I think there's a shortage of computer science teachers.
Yep.
It's hard for me to believe there's a shortage of computer science students.
There weren't enough, so that's when you go
I wonder if it was advising,
Right.
Counseling, one thing.
And also only so many schedules in a day for kids. They're already doing AP this, AP that, and so some people are telling them, giving guidance which ones to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that many of the things that you're doing now and you have done, for example, working with fractions.
Yes.
Edith did her research and with great results. But even in the school where she worked and working with one, it was which one did she work with, equal or something else, something like that. Kids who worked this way got the highest score in the standard. But then nobody else, even in that school where they saw the light, kind of, nobody continued.
Yeah. Well, as soon as she was
to the best
gone.
of my knowledge. So what, and that also works in other schools when
Alan
Kay worked in Los Angeles, where he was working. Also, there were great success, but no one else but BJ continues. We didn't. When you are working now and you see something, what makes teacher buy into it, and what do you do? I mean, that's a big question. The big question is not what you do, but what the teachers could do and what makes them buy into it.
So there has to be an infrastructure in the schools that's outside of us, right? So are there coaches in the schools? Does the school district continue to actually put resources into professional development and for time for teachers to work together? Because you're right, all of those really wonderful projects in the 80s, and like as soon as Alan left, as soon as Edith left, like you go back to business as usual. So I think that's a big
I'd be
piece
curious if you all, I haven't talked about it with the students, but do you think Scratch was the pivotal moment? That is, when we had something that was a lower floor entry to computer programming for kids that I think made it easier. I remember Lenny doing workshops with our teachers, high school and middle school teachers in Bradley. And I think they had a hard time seeing it with e-toys. And these were pretty sophisticated things. But
because we did it wrong. I mean, because we gave them a hard time. When we did it in Montana with a different approach, they were buying it, and 75% used it versus 20% in the first.
So you don't think it was Scratch? You think it was e-toys? E-toys was as accessible.
In the same, and with Scratch also. When MIT tried it, when we worked with them, teachers didn't buy because we made it way too hard for them. And not right. Even when I tried to work with students, I didn't know the students, and I think I did it really wrong. I frightened them more than empowered them.
Yeah.
And they get a second chance or something, maybe I will do it better. But we really definitely were not doing it right. So I don't think that it was the e-tools. I think that it was it's from my point of view,
So what we're
limited
saying-
point of view, it was our approach.
Yeah.
So in the districts that we're seeing this implemented, outside of a researcher coming in, they have built a huge infrastructure of support for teachers.
And that's
Teacher
true with
meetups.
Scratch too, right?
That's-
So Scratch has an enormous community,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
That's associated with it. So there's some, even within the platform, there's infrastructure for it.
yeah. But I think about New York City, right? So the mayor says, do this. The teachers go, what? Right? And then they start working with nonprofits, and the Department of Education hires people in the Department of Ed to help with professional development, and they hire people. It takes any kind of content area, if you're gonna do it well, you have to build teacher capacity. It can't be George and Maya or whoever coming in and doing and working with these one teachers, because as soon as we're gone, that's it. Or as soon as that one administrator leaves, that's it. And so that, I think, is one of the, when we see this really infusing a school or infusing a district, it's because the district or the state or whoever it is has wrapped services around and wrapped support around the teachers.
Rebecca?
For what it's worth, in my limited experience as a CS educator and my less limited experience as a CS student, early exposure to quality CS education, programming education, was the biggest indicator of success in higher level, like college level CS classes. And I started doing programming when I was middle or elementary school with Lego Mindstorms. Robots, they had a block-based interface similar to Scratch. And that was something that was very easily picked up by the kids. And the instructors knew a lot, and the other kids, because it was a multi-year course, knew a lot. And having that foundation of people who understood the material really helped pick it up. Versus in high school, I got to experience two different CS classes side by side. One that was a block-based program, and one that was C++ based, and not block-based, kind of lower level programming language, significantly so. And the amount that the teacher and other students in the classrooms had previous experience and understanding with the material greatly affected how successful the other students thought they were at that material. So our teacher was more familiar with the block-based language, and I was more familiar with it, and a couple other students were. And the students who were new to CS education at that point had so much more satisfaction learning the block-based language as opposed to the lower level language that no one really understood very well. So there's maybe one person in the classroom who tried to help you out with things. So I think that there's definitely a lot of value in exposing kids to CS at a young age, but much more so when the teachers and the educators feel like they have good enough grasp on the material to be good educators.
Thank you. So before we wrap up, can I ask, do we have a vision for 5 years down the road, so what we'd like to see happening in schools as it relates to research, but also as what we're hoping for and seeing in the schools?
I think that one of the things, it's all going to be different for each of us.
That's probably true.
I mean, for me, 5 years from now, I hope that there are some well-defined strategies that we can say to a teacher, all right, so we always talk about how do we provide support and some explicit instruction without killing the fun, right? This balance between providing instruction and letting kids explore. So if there's a toolkit of strategies that we're working on and we can say to teachers, these are some strategies that have some evidence of success. I don't think that in 5 years we'll be able to say much more than that, but I think right now we're saying we have some hypotheses. We're testing out these strategies. We're learning more about them. We're iterating on them. I would love in 5 years from now to say, we've done some work. We have really strong evidence that a broad range of kids can be successful and have self-efficacy and really see themselves as creators, as Todd was saying. So from my perspective, that's where I would like for us to be in 5 years. But that's me as I don't know, other folks?
If you could say just few sentences, the teachers in K-8 today, how many are doing it, how many new joined it, and how does it go in terms of
spreading?
So we've got a small study looking at coaching, and the majority of teachers are receiving coaching and are doing some level of CS. So all the students are doing, they've got like a time of day where the kids are getting computer, just like, I mean, so that hasn't changed. So there's a dedicated computer science time for all kids.
With a teacher.
With the teacher, but the level
With all the teachers or just a specific teacher?
No, all the teachers.
Okay.
So the coaching model right now is depending on how comfortable the teacher is, the coach is either like just providing feedback or doing kind of a co-teaching. So trying to empower more and more teachers. The level, I mean, I would say new teachers are coming in. There's some teachers that are doing more or less, but I would say that the majority of the teachers at one level or another are at least getting exposed to it. I mean, the number of teachers who are like going in and like, this is it. I don't know, what percentage do you think?
We're like super bought in?
Yeah.
It's hard because there's so many.
They're new ones now, that's true.
I mean, there's certainly a handful that were there back a few years ago that are, ones that have been there for a while are very much bought in.
It's true.
For the most part.
Yeah.
And I think in talking with Wendy, I think some of the, because the culture has been built in the building, that computer science education is part of that building, the new teachers that come in, they don't even ask. They just, okay, great, when am I going to start learning about this?
Yeah.
You know, it's just, instead of it being like a brick wall that they're beating their head against because it's different, they knew when they applied to be a part of that building that this was what that building did. And so they went in with the assumption that I'm going to be learning about this, and I'm going to be teaching it.
Yeah. And
it's important.
Yeah.
And it's been attracting teachers based on that idea. Over the summer, during professional development, the teachers that were part of that wrote up a document on the CS magnet, on the identity of Kenwood as a magnet school. And they voted on it electronically, although it wasn't a mandatory vote, but all those who did vote voted in favor of a statement about their norms of, instructional norms for CSCT. And I was pleased to facilitate that because it's a document that states what they expect and what they hope for. And I think there are some misunderstandings around CSCT. I'm thinking of a teacher who said initially she thought, well, it was like a coach who would, or a facilitator who would come in and teach Chinese language. She thought she could sit back and let the instructor teach the Chinese language, and that was just a part of the day. And CS would be like that. She could back off, let the CS teacher do their thing. But that's not what Kenwood does, right? They, as an instructor, are coaching, co-teaching, taking control of the CS instruction because that's their identity. And they want to be adamant about that.
When you guys do the stuff in, not just in this takeout class, you know, the class where they're doing or the time when they're doing coding, but when you do it in the math class or in the you know, in context of another class, how much time is a project? So what I'm asking is, do you do, if they're involving coding, is it a week-long kind of thing or longer?
So that's we had a meeting about that yesterday, actually, now that we're doing development. Because the math is each EM, kind of the schedule is around 4 days and then an extra day. The assumption right now, and I don't know if this is going to flop or not, it used to be much more of like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this long project, that there are going to be some unplugged or small activities for 4 of the days, like within the context that doesn't take a lot of time or replaces something that's already there. And then there'll be 1 day a week that is a scratch computational project. Because now that we're building something, we can't assume that every school is going to have one-on-one computer. Like the idea of like going in a school that doesn't have the resources necessarily. What does it take to actually be able to do this? It has to assume that you're going to have to like get the computers. So that's the assumption that we're going to test out now is like a 1 day a week plus small mini studies, mini experiences.
But aside from math, there are individual teachers that are doing projects in other subject areas that might span several days, right? And then Wendy herself is pulling kids. She does robotics with 1st through 5th grade. She does a 6 weeks robotics rotation as a pull-out. It's a totally separate thing on her own. So they have that as well. So right now, I think it kind of runs the unit.
Yeah.
Does Kenwood do the FLL, the Lego robotics thing? No.
I think so.
They have some Lego robotics,
But they don't
They're not
actually.
doing
They're not.
They're not doing
the
FL,
first
no.
robotics stuff. No,
Okay.
I don't think they're competing. But you could get that started.
No, I know. Why does Kenwood not do that?
Oh,
I haven't been there in 2 years, so
Okay.
I don't know.
I think they may not be aware. Shara,
Oh,
who's
I'm sure
doing it,
they're aware.
of the first
It's all over
robotics.
the place.
They're, yeah, we could certainly bring it to their attention. And see
Plus
if
this
some
idea of
people
like the
take it.
competition isn't always necessarily for everyone,
Right,
right?
I'm
that's
sure.
that's
Just saying.
That's a good point. I guess I'd like to say something to the grad students who gave it, besides thank you so much for coming and do this. Yes. My hope is that, that there are more in your career sessions like this. A lot of the sessions that I go to for presentations in the College of Ed are research presentations like ARA type things. But these sessions that Misty does are very practitioner oriented, I think, and talking about schools. And I hope that becomes more common in your careers. And I'm grateful that you've come over and presented this to us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.